bingo collar. I can't let anyone think that I'm not as good looking as I think I am.
Okay, but why didn't you just close the camera off? Because the only person who thinks you're good looking is yourself. Oops, did I say that?
Well, the problem with that is I won't be able to look at myself, and my narcissism will be unrealized.
Oh, okay. So your narcissistic self needs to have the camera. So I take it you have the camera on and you're in Zoom 24/7 or in the camera app 24/7, so you can look at yourself.
No, I just keep a mirror close by.
Oh, okay. Well, that's more practical. Yeah. It's more practical. But again, the only trouble is with the camera, you see, that blemish on your left cheek, I can see it in the camera.
Well, I don't like I think I don't the mirrors you can buy these days are such low quality. It shows me as a fat old guy. Holy cow. No way. I'm not a fat old guy.
So obviously you clearly, your mind thinks you're still in your 20s, yes?
Well, I don't know what my mind thinks. All I know is it's a very young mind, because I often get people saying you're immature.
All right. Well, welcome everybody to Talking Niagara, not Immature Dave show. We're not really having a go at Dave. We're just having a little bit of fun on a Friday morning. So welcome everybody. So Air Canada, back to the story from yesterday. Air Canada suspends routes that they consider no longer economically feasible, and they're basically saying jet fuel prices have doubled since the start of the Iran conflict, making it really impacting profitability for some of the less economically viable routes. Now, this, of course, probably means flights into Moose Jaw and things like that.
Well, it also means flights to wherever you want to go. If you haven't booked your flight before all this happened, your tickets are going to be quite costly. And and more of that is going to be foisted onto the traveler. Thank you so much for the short term, which never seems to end, short-term pain. The long version of the short-term pain is kicking in right now.
And I can see prices, for example, prices to Europe within the short period of time. If this fuel crisis continues, I can see fuel, the price to fly to Europe rising to $5,000 or more, and that's going economy.
Unfortunately, the dummy in chief south of the border there, BB's boy, he unfortunately, this is supposed to be the short-term pain that's going to get us long-term gain. The world is going to be a freer and better place, and all we have to do is suffer longer. Now, what this would do for a guy like me, it may cause me to cancel a trip if I wanted to plan a trip because of the high cost. But that's not the only thing. There are going to be less flights. There are already canceled flights, less flights, and those flights that will be available will be more expensive. So fuel price, aviation fuel is very close to being exhausted in many places. They really do have to get that strait opened up. But right now it doesn't look too good. As a matter of fact, it looks like things may escalate, because more and more gunboats are going there, more and more aircraft carriers, more and more troops. That signals escalation, which means the price of oil will continue to be high. The price of flight fuel will continue to be high. It doesn't look good right now, and I think somebody with a brain should take over. I don't know, maybe get somebody from Switzerland and say, look, you guys go away. I'm going to make a decision here. like you do this, and open this straight. You know.
Yeah. Well, the ones that are affected, some of the ones that are affected, Fort McMurray, Alberta to Vancouver, Salt Lake City to Toronto. And these are weird. These are ones that you'd not expect. Toronto and Montreal to JFK.
That one, yeah, that one. I like. There's a nice little shuttle from Buffalo to the airports in New York. It's really easy to get on.
Well, you and I would, but
so
if you're living,
I like Buffalo Airport, but if you're gonna go anywhere, you got to go via New York City, probably. You know,
yeah,
so
you and I would.
So if anyone here has a problem getting to going from Toronto to New York, think of actually going from Buffalo.
Yeah, you and I would go from Buffalo anyway. I wouldn't go an hour plus to Toronto if I'm flying to New York. I'd just go, 30 minutes down the road to Buffalo and fly from there. It's cheaper.
Well, it depends on what your connecting flight's going to be.
Yeah.
Sometimes if you book your flight, you say you book it all the way through Delta or something. Like, I'm just digging these names up. You might want to go out of Toronto because it's easier to connect with your next flight.
Well, I don't know.
Depending on.
Yeah.
Because I had to do that once when I went to, I think it was Ghana.
Well, probably, you see, that's for sure. If you, it depends upon where, because if you're landing in LaGuardia and you then have to get to JFK, then that's problematic for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on.
So that's a sad thing. I think just as a last thought on that, this short-term pain seems to be extending now.
Yeah.
It's we have already started all February 28th, and it was supposed to be all over in 4 to 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Well, now we are now on week 4, are we not? Or week 8?
We're beyond that.
Week 8, right?
Yeah, week 8. Thank you. I think
week
that's
8.
Correct. Yeah.
So the 4 to 6 weeks really didn't work, and particularly when victory was already being acclaimed more than a couple times now.
Yep.
And victory, what? The average person is not reaping the rewards of said victory. The average person who's so Iran is being put out of the picture, according to Donald J. for Jesus Trump. And yet the people of the world, especially the poor people, even the poor people in the United States, are feeling the crunch of this questionable war.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Moving on. The Inquest jury deliberating over the Heather Winterstein trial, that continues. Winterstein. Sorry, that was my fault. I typed it wrong earlier on when it came to the right result. Okay, they're in their second.
You're mixing her up with Harvey Weinstein.
I am, yes. Okay, I do apologize to her family. Yes, so they're in their second day deliberating on this. It's not an easy decision to come to.
No, it wasn't. Now, this is a very tragic thing. We went over this yesterday, but what it didn't do really in the article yesterday was point out, it mentioned 68 points that have come up that our health system should address. Unfortunately, a young woman died because of bad health procedures, and of course, it was pointed out that that the bias may have come up because she was a Native girl, young lady, actually. No, it doesn't work because a guy I know, the same thing happened to him. The very same thing happened to him. He got sick up north on working on close to one of the mining concerns up there. He was part of my union. When he flew into Toronto, the first thing he did was go to a hospital, and they said, "Oh, you got a cold," and they sent him home or something, And then he was at home and he was sicker and sicker. And then he went to the doctors and everything. He was dismissed out of hand. "Oh, you're sick. You just get over it." Finally, he got so sick he went to the hospital, but it was too late and he died of sepsis. Same thing. He was ignored.
Yeah.
Right. He was ignored. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
But the problem here is, especially in that sort of situation where you fly into Toronto, you return to Toronto, and he probably said, I've been feeling ill for the week, and they said, well, why didn't you go to the hospital? Because I was remote, so I'm flying in, returning to Toronto, and now it's like I think they're kind of going, well, because you haven't been there all week, why would we bother treating you? It clearly isn't an issue. And the attitude with that is it clearly isn't an issue. Get lost, right? That type of thing, right?
well, the problem is you have to determine, you have to determine what went wrong.
Yeah.
And they have 68 recommendations here, some of which I think deal with like anti-bias training or something. But it was pretty clear that in this particular case, that was not an issue. Yeah. But maybe it's a pretty good idea to look at it anyway. Now, the Inquest jury issues 68 recommendations for all of these hospitals, police, paramedics. And they are, and I'm trying to find some right now. Of these recommendations, most are aimed at the Niagara Health, but also the Ontario hospitals. 19 specifically addressed cultural, safety, and anti-bias. Well, 19 of them, including protocols be developed to build trust between Indigenous. Well, that's all very important. I suppose that was the fear here, that it was anti-bias or a bias against plaintiffs. It didn't seem it wasn't that in this particular case, but obviously somebody's heard enough evidence to suggest that it could be a factor moving forward. So that's the anti-bias training is probably a good thing. I'm more concerned of what happened after she went into the emergency 2 days in a row. And it says several recommendations were designed to enhance policies and procedures for triaging and reassessing patients, including to ensure significant staff. Well, for one thing, there's not enough triage nurses, so they run off their feet. So obviously something that doesn't look really urgent, like myself, I had a broken hip and I sat there 8 hours. And when I first got in, my blood pressure was close to 200. It's 196 or something, or 100. And yet they didn't come to look at me again for 3 hours. So if somebody's got blood pressure around 200%, right, and they didn't come to recheck me for 3 hours with a blood pressure of that high,
you could have been dead.
Something wrong.
Yeah, you could have been dead.
Yeah, I could have been dead. It happened to a friend of mine who went into the hospital for their local injection. They had to get an injection every week. And they, in order to do that, they have to lie down on the gurney. Well, he lied down on the gurney and had a heart attack, and nobody noticed.
Yeah,
they just thought it was a reaction to the injection that he gets every week. And there he did. He died right there on the gurney. They didn't even know it. They come to wake him up, and he'd been dead. Yeah, he's sitting right in the hall. People walking past him. This doesn't sound good, does it?
What you have to okay, Mike is saying what went wrong. You have to have you been to our hospital? Understaffed, too many closed beds, hallway treatments. Yeah, it's problematic. Yeah. Absolutely.
So it may not be at all a quality of the healthcare, although in the case of a young woman I mentioned yesterday that had appendicitis, her doctor was just completely stupid, and it was the easiest thing in the world. When she told me what was wrong with her, I said, it's appendicitis. And she said, I thought so too. She was a nurse. Then she went to the hospital, and the hospital said, no, it's not. Something you ate.
Yeah, yeah.
I knew it was appendicitis. She knew it was appendicitis. The doctor said, no, I'm not going to do any further. That's something you ate.
Yeah.
Look, it could have killed her. She had to come back the next day in extreme pain. And the appendix had burst. So you got to wonder. There are some pretty bad doctors out there, but mostly they're not that bad. It's the system over too much. Not enough nurses, not enough healthcare. The system's wrong. I don't know. I mean, I got some pretty good care when I was in Thailand when I broke my arm and damaged my knee. I went in there. I didn't have much wait time. I was in there with a bunch of Thais. They took me in order and went through the process. I got X-rays. I got this, that, and the other thing. Got doctors, everything. It was quick and efficient. I don't know why we can't be the same.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Yeah, and I don't know why we can't do the same either. We just got to have, we just got to change our attitudes on this. All right.
Well, there's one more thing. The Niagara Health paramedics and police are asked to participate in a healing ceremony with the Winterstein family in the indigenous community. So that's may help. That may help with the with
it
the
may or may not
with the sorrow that the family has to deal with, and maybe draw some closure.
It may not. Remember, there are some people to whom this sort of stuff is truly weird, right? I'm not making any criticism, but there are some people who would refuse to get involved in that because it's against their personal feelings about things like that.
I don't know, man. Like it's just a religious ceremony, basically. That's all it is. I mean, it's like a memorial, basically. They're having basically.
Sometimes that causes more consternation than healing. That's all I'm meaning.
Well, they're going to have to just, I would say, a representative from the police, paramedics, and a hospital send somebody, right, that can, because this means something to the family, the healthcare system let her down. The very least they could do is come to a healing ceremony memorial for the young lady.
Yeah.
To make the family feel better.
Okay.
Give them some kind of closure.
Yeah. All right. Moving on. Poilievre says that Carney's losing the trade war and wants to draw closer to the USA.
The problem with Poilievre, what he's sounding like now, he unfortunately, he sounds like he wants to bow down to them. He says, well, we got to get a little bit closer. Well, remember, Carney and even Trudeau before him had been advised, walk on eggshells here, bow down, smile, tell the guy how wonderful he is, how great he is, and all of that. And, give him what he wants a little bit, Unfortunately, that's what Poilievre sounds like to me, that he feels that Carney at this particular time hasn't come up with any kind of deal. But that's in a big way because how weird things are in the United States right now. Almost nobody has got a deal out of the United States. They say they're going to have 90 deals in 90 days and all that. There isn't anything that you can look down on paper. Very few places. They've got a deal with the European Union. They've got a couple of deals here and there, but it's pretty shaky all in all, and particularly because of the tariff rules have changed now, because the conservative stacked Supreme Court even didn't like what Trump was doing with his tariffs.
Yeah.
So so things have changed, and I don't think Poilievre's got what it takes to deal with this guy.
No, I don't think so either.
I don't. I think he'll give away the farm.
Patting his ego is not going to help the situation right now.
Yeah. Now, those people who are those people who are most vocal right now, who are challenging or making questions about Carney's approach, say that he's not being obsequious enough. He's not sort of giving way a little bit. They feel they should give up some more, or anything to make a deal, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Daniel Smith was like that from the very beginning. Went down and talked to Trump, thought he was a great guy, and I'd like to see her opinion now. You're dealing with the trade guy like Lutnick, who is one of the Epstein weirdos. Trump himself was an Epstein buddy. You've got all these guys that dislike Canada, want Canada to be the 51st state, and want Alberta to separate. Anything of that kind to disrupt Canada. And yet you've got most of the states and congressmen and senators wanting to uphold the USMCA.
Yeah.
Now, I will say this, that the USMCA is USMCA called that in the United States. It's called Kuzma up here, right? Because Canada, USA, and Mexico. In Mexico, it's called Mexico, United States, and Canada. So I heard that complaint. Why don't we all just call it USMCA? Why don't we call it, right, what it was in the first place?
NAFTA.
Right? NAFTA.
Yeah.
North America. You know, It makes much more sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's because Trump had to put his label on it. Tell everybody in the world the greatest deal of all time, greatest trade deal. But he didn't change things much. And when you have a guy like Trump then saying you're going to have an entry fee to even get into the trade talks, when he says, okay, these are the things you have to give up right away before we even begin to talk. And Carney says, there's no way we're going to do that. Now, if we go back a year or so, they wouldn't have said abruptly, no way, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
They would have been much more on eggshells. And just about every other country just kind of bowed down to him, says how wonderful he is, give him a few awards, give him a peace, FIFA give him a peace award. Switzerland gave him a Rolex desk watch made of gold, and all these things, anything to placate his ego. But people aren't playing that game anymore. They see he's that the Trump administration is in trouble.
That ran out 6 months ago, Dave. That idea ran out 6 months ago.
What idea?
The idea about placating him, yes, bowing down and the greatest guy on the planet. That idea is so passé now. The concept was dead 6 months ago.
You go into the developing world, you go into the Middle East, and you go to some of the other places in the developing world, and we've got a leader who can be manipulated by stroking his ego. That's exactly what they do.
Yeah.
The Middle East kingdoms, the oil-rich kingdoms or countries in the Middle East, give him money and tell him how great he is.
Yeah.
They buy his influence. The smaller countries just tell him that he's a wonderful guy. He solved the war. He didn't solve any war, but they say they did. So it will placate his and then tell him how wonderful he is. So they know that. They know that kind of potentate. They know, they've seen them before. Okay, tell him how wonderful he is, and maybe we'll get something out of him.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. The other question about that one, of course, is that we've also got to consider that Carney has recently said that lifting the U.S. liquor ban will depend upon Trump's ending an assault upon steel, autos, and lumber. And I'd like to see nothing less than us remove the U.S. liquor ban, because there are some U.S. liquors I like. But in this regard, we've got to consider that.
Well, the only thing I buy, food or liquor or anything that I buy from the U.S. now is walnuts. I can't find them growing anywhere else. I buy a couple of dollars worth of walnuts every week. That is the only thing that I won't buy. I found oranges or citrus products from Israel, and I was about to buy them, and I thought, no, I'm not going to do that either because of what they're doing.
Yeah.
The madness. Now you're in a situation. For me, I'm in a situation where I'm thinking of the poor guys that are harvesting these things, and they're probably not Israelis. They're probably people from Thailand or other places or Philippines who are harvesting them. So I'm thinking, if I don't buy them, like, will it cost them their job, kind of thing? But then I thought, no, I got to make my own personal protest against Israel and the brutish things they've been doing in the Middle East, and the non-democracy way they're behaving themselves. So I can't. So I wouldn't buy them. But I still am stuck with buying. I'm still stuck with buying walnuts from the United States. So I will make that allowance. I will tell them. I will tell Mark Carney, show that you make some concession towards the United States and buy $2 worth of walnuts like I do.
Yeah, but again, this whole question about lifting the U.S. liquor ban, Trump goes on about it, but and many provinces here, it was a provincial thing, the banning of U.S. liquors, and not really a federal decision. It was people like Ford, Mo, and others that actually made such decisions.
Well, we find that Alberta and Saskatchewan have gone the other way. They put the liquor back on the shelves, so they're okay with that. Yeah. Probably because they have pending deals coming up. There's more oil to be sold. We don't want to give Trump an excuse to sort of do something dumb with the oil or gas they're getting, or the potash. These poor farmers need potash, and he's dumping huge tariffs on it. And continually, even today, even a couple of weeks ago, they're going to have to pay more in tariffs. He talked about from Canada or other places. It's not the Canadians or the Russians or anyone else who's paying the tariffs. It is the American people that are paying the tariffs.
Yeah.
And they just sort of don't seem to get that. They keep playing it as if China is paying the tariffs or Canada's paying the tariffs. But when you add a tariff to potash and you don't have enough potash, if you have a potash mine and it's between your potash and Canadian potash, then it makes a sense to put a tariff on the Canadian potash to make it more expensive so that the American potash miners will have an advantage. But they don't. They can. I think Canada supplies them with 70% of the potash they need. They can't make it up. They can't make it up from other countries. They can't make it up in their own country. It's senseless to put a tariff on potash then. All it does is it puts an expense. But they want you to be ignorant. And anyway, what does Mike say here? Carney is right. USA has broken the terms of the deal with his illegal tariffs. Correct. Correct. Those are illegal. And the Supreme Court has made that known. Unfortunately for us, Trump has a lot of other tariff possibilities. But what they have to do, I think, is make it very clear to the average American that some tariffs are going to be good for them, but not the tariffs between Canada and the United States, and probably not the tariffs between Mexico and the United States. There has to be certain things tweaked. There has to be origin, like particularly in Mexico, when a lot of parts came in from that Mexico is using, or China was using Mexico as a launch pad for its stuff, and made it unclear the origin of the parts and stuff that are actually coming from China. But that was Mexico, not Canada.
Yeah.
The source of a lot of the stuff from Canada going into the
Actually,
United States.
let's be honest. He tars us all with the same brush.
Yeah, it's hard to know. Like, and he's extremely irrational. You've got this bridge that he wants to keep closed now. So the thing is totally built. It's beautiful, and ready to go. Michigan's happy. Canada's happy. Everybody's happy. We got a brand new bridge. One of his donors doesn't like it, and he feeds Lutnick some money, and then Lutnick talks in Trump's ear, and he says, "Oh well, we're not going to open that bridge now. What for?" Makes absolutely no sense, doesn't it?
No,
it makes no sense when he does stuff like put tariffs on Brazil when they have a huge trade imbalance with that favors the United States on Brazil. Doesn't make any sense at all. It's political.
Yeah. All right. Moving on. Algoma Steel is fighting in the Ontario courts to void to have Ontario void a contract with U.S. Steel.
Yes, well, the contract is for iron pellets. Now, what are iron pellets? Well, they're a semi-refined ore, basically. So, in U.S. Steel has these big mining concerns in Minnesota. They have some of the biggest open pit mines that are going there. I think even Bob Dylan's hometown was an iron ore mining town. That's how big of a deal it is in Minnesota. So what they do is they dig up a lot of the iron ore and they semi-refine it into pellets. And those pellets are the things that are perfect for blast furnace. So they and having worked on blast furnaces, steel mills and stuff like that, if you look at the conveyor, when the conveyor goes up, what you have in is the conveyors that put a charge into the blast furnace are iron pellets and coke and lime. Lime is what acts as a flux and brings the impurities in the iron ore up to the surface, right? So when you pour, when you tap the blast furnace, so it's mostly pure iron. But that iron is coming from U.S. Steel's mines in Minnesota. The problem here is that these huge contracts were made prior to the tariffs. So the steel that was going to be made from Algoma, and this is the Algoma was going to go to markets in the United States. They're saying that we can't oblige those contracts anymore because things have changed. It's been a political change. It'd be impossible for us. We have perfect right to disqualify those contracts because we can't use them anymore. We can't have any of that because of a political difference. You know what I mean? So basically, and this is the interconnection between the countries. So Canada buys iron ore product from the United States. So the iron ore is American, comes into a Canadian blast furnace. They make steel from it, and that steel made from American iron ore is then sold to the United States. So now we're not buying that iron ore from the United States anymore, right? And so Algoma can't make the steel from American iron ore to sell back to the United States. So everybody's losing a job here. And the people who are buying, that used to buy the steel from Canada, are now paying a higher price for American-made steel. It really doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No. Exactly.
But that's the sort of situation we are in here. So in the end, if and what about the tariffs? So there's a 50% tariff on Canadian steel, but nowhere in there does it take into account that iron ore came from the United States. Don't we get a reduced tariff because the iron ore came from the U.S.?
A fair question.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, and that should be that should actually be a special type of relationship. And even if there was a tariff applied, it should be reduced because of the cross-border nature of all of that stuff.
So so Algoma is making steel, which helps employ the miners in Minnesota. Now, where are they going to get their coke from? I bet you get their coal to make coke from the United States as well. In the So has anyone in the United States said that? Well, we're going to put a 50% tariff on Canadian steel, but they say with the cars, they're going to do tariffs depending on what components are in the car. So if there's Canadian components or Mexican components, we're going to add tariff to those components, which will add to the cost of the car, right? And if you take those components out, put American ones in, it's whatever. But if they're doing that with a car, how come they're not taking the pieces of the steel, right? First of all, you have American workers bringing out American iron ore that is shipped probably by an American ship to Algoma, and they're probably using American coal too, because I don't know any coal sources around there that don't come from Duluth or maybe possibly from Pennsylvania, but the coal is coming from the States. So you have American coal that makes coke. You've got American iron ore.
Well, it's a safe assumption, right?
You've employed coal miners and you've employed iron ore miners.
Yeah.
Then you make the steel with these component parts from, so the labor and the blast furnace. So basically, it's half American and half Canadian when you really look at it.
Yeah.
And yet the tariff doesn't reflect that.
Yeah, exactly. All right. And that's nonsense, because you've got several products crossing the border to make another product that goes back across the border.
That's how nuts these tariff situations are. Now, I have no problem with the Americans adjusting trade to make it more fair to them throughout the world, but we aren't the ones that are being unfair. And if it looks like we are, we have ways in which we can deal with that through negotiations and readjusting the USMCA deal. And that's what the whole process is set up to do. But I don't know. They've got these primitive, barbaric notions in the United States that you have to be the tough guy and look like the tough guy and make your opponent bow down. And you got to look like you're getting more out of the deal than they are. When deals like this is supposed to be mutually helpful, and that's the whole idea. If they are mutually beneficial, then that trade network continues and there's wealth enough to be pushed for everywhere. But right now, what the American system is, we want it all. And if we don't get all, we're going to get most. And you have to oblige us. You have to, I don't know. And then you got weirdos like Lutnick, Epstein Lutnick, Epstein Trump. I don't know. I don't know where we're going to go with this, really.
All right. Okay. So moving on. Okay. The Moose Cree First Nations vulnerable residents are being evacuated again. Is this the fourth time this winter?
They haven't even gone back. A lot of them haven't gone back. So it's not. Some of them have gone back to the reserve because it's hunting season, and that's an important part of their cycle up there. They're probably going to get a large amount of their meat stocks from hunting. So any northern community, whether it's indigenous or white, the hunting season is very important.
Oh, I know. Yeah.
So
again,
so some went back. Mm-hmm. All right. So a pile of them came, about 1,500 came into Niagara because, and other places in Ontario, but 1,500 here in Niagara. And that's because of the water and sewage problems they had. Before that, it was the fire. I think you're thinking of the other time the evacuation was the fire. This time, this particular group was evacuated because of the water and sewage problem, which has been an issue way back into Trudeau's time, and they haven't seemed to be able to resolve it. And so they have to come here until that's fixed. Now, some of them went back during the hunting season, but now because of flooding issues and fear of flooding issues and an exceptionally and a larger than normal snowfall, even for up there, there's going to be plumbing or flooding issues. So they're likely going to come back. And we might have this, the Saskatchewan nation here for, I hope I didn't, well, I probably said that wrong. They're going to be here for a while anyway, at least until the better weather comes and the ground dries up.
All right. Yeah. Saskatchewan First Nation, I think, is what you missed the S at the beginning.
Oh, okay. So
it's fine.
Yeah, so yeah,
I'm sure they will forgive you, or you'll have to go to a sweat lodge for a month.
Yeah, well, one of my sons had to go to a healing lodge when by accident. He was living up in Thunder Bay, and by accident they wandered onto native land and started having a fire and a little campfire one night, and having a little party in that, and they were caught, and they were completely oblivious of the fact that it was native land. And I think it was a particular part of the native land which was spiritual or something, I forget but exactly, but part of they didn't get a fine for it or anything like that. What they had to do was attend a sweat lodge and sort of as a means by which to apologize for intruding on their land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
well, I think you should go to the sweat lodge for a month. The mispronunciation of the name,
yeah. I could do, yeah.
We need a thinner, fitter Dave Wheeler to come back.
Yeah. Well, I might be in. If I need to be thinner, fitter, I might be in there for a month for sure.
Well, yeah, but then how will the hip do?
Yeah. Anyway, so those are well, welcome. Come on to Niagara Falls. These are Canadians now. At least we don't have that problem with the refugees from Roxham Road, the questionable refugees from Roxham Road that were sent up here by New York City, so that controversy is not here. So now we are putting these hotels to good use for Canadians, right? Yeah. And they need the help. So when you fill up our huge hotel capacity with Canadians who need help, that's a whole different story, isn't it?
Yeah. All right. Okay. Thank you. All right. Budget Bill 197 amends the province's freedom of information legislation, reducing public access to records from top political offices like the Prime Minister's office, etc., etc. I got a problem with this. These amendments are retroactive to 1988, so it's early records, not later records, that are of concern. However, that said, I've got a problem with how this is being put together. A budget bill should be purely and simply about budget, not about making amendments to other laws.
Well, it's not from what I read, it seems it's not unusual that governments will lump things all in together.
I know.
This is problematic for me. This is freedom of information. You would think that would be a no-brainer. Now, what is it about the freedom of information that Dougie doesn't like? So Dougie says that you can't have freedom of information for your top offices. That that not only intrudes on their freedom, but complicates things when it comes to negotiations or all other things. Is that true? What good is a Freedom of Information Act if you can't get information freely?
Yeah. And part of the challenge is, so 90% of all FOI requests in most places relate to specific conditions, i.e., how you treated me, right? I want FOIs about how the premier, how the trade secretary treated me as an individual.
Okay, I'll take your word for that one. Yep.
Right. There's a lot. That's a majority of requests. A majority of those such requests come back with nothing. Right. Yeah. No, we have no information about you. Right. A lot. Other ones would also relate to, lawsuits, etc., that might relate to things that have happened in government. I'm not sure what he's trying to limit access to.
Yeah, well, is this a slippery slope? So I'm going to ask you this: is this a slippery slope? Is this a slippery slope where he's been able to push this through Parliament because he's got the weight of numbers on his side, and he wants limited access to the freedom of information? Now, he does say 95% of freedom of information requests will be granted. But it's the real important ones, the ones that are consequential, that he's shutting the door on.
Yeah.
Shutting the door on the upper offices and everything. Now, his excuse, and it might not be just an excuse, it could be something to this. He's saying that the Freedom of Information Act came out long before cell phones and all that, back in the 80s. And it was good for the time. But however, now because of the electronics, cell phones and other kinds of electronics, this has caused a breach of a potential breach of privacy, breach of sensitive information. All these things can be broken now because of the electronic nature of the information that's floating around there. Is Pandora's box open too wide here? Should it be shut a little? That's what he is saying, right?
That is what he's saying. Absolutely, that is the essence of what this amendment is about, right? Saying that the Pandora's box is way open too wide.
Yeah, you can open it a little bit and let stuff out once in a while, but nowadays it's hard to put the lid on it.
And the vast majority, as I said, the vast majority of information is of a personal nature. But again, when it comes to cabinet offices, a lot of that information will also therefore be about trade deals and things like that. And whether you get any of that, it depends upon the time, because if you're looking at deals that Doug Ford is doing now, you're not going to get anything because it's all going to be redacted.
Yeah. So I'm asking, is this actually a slippery slope? Is it a shutting of a door that?
Yeah, potentially.
Yes. Yeah. And who has examined this carefully enough? And that is another thing. Is this going to come up with legal scrutiny? Now, I would like to know from the other parties. Now, the other parties have said, well, look, of all the problems we've had with Doug Ford when he's doing the land swaps, the greenbelt thing, even the gravy plane that he just asked, a lot of that stuff was determined by digging into information we may otherwise not have had.
Yeah.
Do we really are prepared for that? Now, on the other hand, can you get together with the other politicians of the country and determine whether or not the Freedom of Information Act is too intrusive in important parts of government that will tip the balance in trade negotiations, let's say? if you want freedom of information on how Doug Ford is going to be dealing with the United States in some sort of trade aspect, and you dig in, that's my right to find out. You dig in and you tip the balance in the favor of who is opposing Ontario. These are, but where is the evidence? And this is what bothers us immediately. Immediately, you think, well, he wants to close up Freedom of Information Act, and right away your hackles get up. Wait a minute. That's freedom of speech. That is something. That is information that we are allowed to have. But on the other hand, if you have this kind of information, imagine if you had information on the secrets on the spy agency of Canada, who need stealth and anonymity to do their job, kind of thing. You know what I mean? What if you have the medical records of somebody that you shouldn't have, or any other thing in government? So I would like the evidence brought to me and say, this is why we need to close up freedom of information in these particular areas.
Well, one of the key factors, of course, is when you think about when the Freedom of Information Bill was applied, it was put in 1988, which is only a few years after we had a constitution written. So clearly, freedom of information would have been in the mind of those drafting the constitution. Surely, if they had thought about that, they'd have encompassed freedom of information concepts and protection within the charter.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? Because clearly 1988, you're doing FOI. It must have been in the mind of people in 1982.
Yes. Anyway, so in the 1980s, obviously, I remember when it came in, I think it was a conservative effort to make freedom of information, which I think it was a jaw-dropping moment for me, because all the conservatives want this freedom of information. That's a good sign. Usually you get the idea that they'd be more restrictive and things like that, but they weren't. They're wide open. And so I thought that was a good idea back then. But basically, I'm going to go right back to where we are today, right? Is it, and I'm asking you this question, and I'm asking anyone else's, is this the slippery slope?
Yes.
We see what's happening in the States right now. Limitations of freedom, censorship. When the Biden administration was in, the far left elements of the United States were big on censorship. Now the far right is in power, and they're big on censorship.
Well, there was a ruling.
When you do censorship, the Freedom of Information Act, you're going to close that door.
Yeah, there was a ruling by the court, by Superior Court in Ontario, that basically ordered the Premier to release personal cell phone records for review by the Information and Privacy Commissioner, and clearly this now nullifies that court order.
Well, that's one of the things Doug was saying. Like he's saying my cell phone number is available to anyone, but if they have Freedom of Information Act, you can imagine they'd be digging in there all day long through all his personal mail or whatever else.
Yeah.
And certain things should be left to your individuals. Like if I have a conversation with somebody, I don't want that out there, and I don't want that implicated. If I have if I go for a beer with somebody that happens to be, in the government or have dealings with the government, I don't want everyone in the world to know that I had a beer with this guy just because I want to shoot a stick of pool and have a beer.
Yeah.
So anyway, what else we got? Because we have nowhere else to go with this.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So basically, Russia says it's halting the flow of oil to Germany.
I read this. It's been a couple of days since I read it, but it is bizarre, is it not?
Yeah.
Is it not bizarre that Germany, who is feeding Ukraine munitions to fight Russia, still relies on Russian oil? But this, of course, is coming from Kazakhstan. So technically speaking, it's Kazakh oil, which then the Germans can say, well, at least it's not Russian. But it has to go through Russian territory where the Russians are going to take a piece of the action for the transportation cost of that oil. So Germany can say, well, I'm not buying Russian oil, I'm buying Kazakh oil, well, which is just dumb. And now Russia can say, well, I got to turn it off now. What about that? What are you going to do? Mm-hmm. It's obviously a sign to the Germans, we're going to cut off your energy, and there's not much you can do about it because Kazakhstan can't do anything about it.
Yeah, 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 and the whole point is that Kazakhstan is actually a client state of Russia anyway, and very dependent upon Russia, and Russia's made that clear over the last few years. I don't know. Is actually Kazakhstan actually independent anymore? I don't know that it is it?
Kazakhstan, no, it's not. But it is.
Yeah.
It has strong ties with Russia and strong interdependence. So it's kind of like Kazakhstan is like us in the United States. We're not going to be able to do anything we want without the U.S. approving of it, So,
so it is independent, but it isn't independent, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah. And Germany should have been looking for alternatives for a long time. This has been amply clear.
Yeah. So,
but Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak has said that Germans have given up on Russian oil, so they're doing fine.
Yeah. This is weird. Like, and the other pipeline goes through Ukraine or Belarus and things like this. The whole thing is weird because Russian oil is supposed to be sanctioned, but Europeans are still reliant on Russian oil and gas. And it's getting there somewhere, somehow, this deviation or that deviation.
Yeah.
And remember when Biden put all the sanctions on Russia, and Russia would not be able to conduct the war any further because of the huge sanctions and cost against the Russians, and the Russians have been persecuting this war for years now. All of Biden's predictions went out the window, pretty much like Trump's predictions about Iran, but have gone out the window. But Biden's predictions about how long Russia could handle this was dumb. That's probably why they wanted the persecution of the war itself, because it would bankrupt Russia, and Russia found a way. Well, nobody took into account that everybody needs oil, and so somehow, some way, Russian oil is getting into the market. Lots of it's getting into the European Union. They're buying it, whether it comes from Kazakhstan or whatever.
Yeah.
The whole thing is bizarre.
Yeah.
The Europeans are buying weapons from the United States, supplying Ukraine to fight Russia, that makes money selling oil to who?
Europe.
Yeah.
It's a merry-go-round that probably the Russians, I don't know. It is odd. Yeah.
And now Russians are making top dollar with the oil because the U.S. has dropped the sanctions on Russian oil. They're happy as all hell. They're making money hand over fist.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And before they put up the blockade, the Iranians were making money hand over fist on the inflated oil price. It is dumb, and dumber. And I don't know. I don't know. I will say this: like we're coming near the end, and this is Friday. And one thing I did want to point out is the rise in anti-Semitism. There's a lot of news about the rise in anti-Semitism. As a matter of fact, the Jewish I don't think it was a Jewish community, but a Jewish concern was asking that May become Jewish Heritage Month. But they mentioned anti-Semitism as part of the reason why this has to happen. I am not so sure that anti-Semitism is on the rise, not the old-fashioned kind anyway. I can see a lot of anti-Israeli and anti-Zionist. Now, the Anti-Defamation League has said there's been an 893% rise in anti-Semitism, but that is because they made anti-Zionism determined that was actually anti-Semitism too, which does not make sense. Anti-Israel comments are not anti-Semitism; they're anti-political. So I wouldn't think. I would say be cautiously alarmed that may be a rise in anti-Semitism as we see people shooting children's schools and abominable things like that. But I wouldn't be too scared that it's rising too great. It's like more of a political thing. In any case, I still am worried about the rise of anti-Semitism as Israel looks worse and worse on the world stage. Remember, this is a government; it's not a people. There are people who say, "Oh, well, it's the Jews doing it." Well, no, it's Israel is doing it. It's like, I say.
Yep.
So I would say be very, very guarded with this, and we it's something that's just come up with me. And as we're coming near the conclusion of the show for this week, I also like to always remember Gaza. I will not forget Gaza. It is a nightmare for the people who live there, and I don't know what we need. We need somebody to fix this. We need somebody with a backbone that can go in and say, "Look, this is enough. Is enough. Let's get these children fed. Let's get them to school. Let's get them a home. Let's do something." You cannot just make things so terrible that you're going to force them out. You can't force them out with the end of a bayonet. You try to force them out by making their living conditions appalling. They do that in the West Bank too. They urinate on Palestinian homes. I don't know. They do all kinds of throw garbage in Palestinian areas. Anything to make it very, very difficult for people to live. And I like to point that out. So Gaza, do not forget Gaza, and please pray for peace.